happening. Thank you for coming to this afternoon's presentation for the Harney County Migratory Bird Festival. We are here to learn about eBird and community science from Teresa Bird Wicks, who works for Portland Audubon Society as the Eastern Oregon Field Program Coordinator. We'll learn a little bit more about Teresa as we go along today. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what you can expect. So I'm your host, I'm Janelle Wicks. I'm the Executive Director for the Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I am thrilled that in my role, I get to be on the planning committee for the Bird Festival and bring these virtual presentations to our guests who either do arrive and attend the festival or want an opportunity to connect with birding in Harney County from wherever you may be. So a small disclaimer, I am the new mother of twins and also am hosting from home with our 3 dogs. So I will stay muted through a majority of the presentation, but moderate question and answer as we go along. So please find the chat box if you want to be able to communicate with us that way. So what you can expect is approximately 40 minutes of presentation and time for Q&A at the end of the hour. We're going to ask that people remain muted and type questions in the chat box. However, this is a really small group, and so I think we can probably manage to unmute and communicate as a group when appropriate. So this presentation, along with all the other virtual programs, the Passport Bird Crawl event happening as part of the festival, and a variety of in-person programs are all brought to you by our community partnership that puts together the festival every year. We work all year long as a group of federal agency employees, nonprofit employees, and local community organizations and businesses to bring the festival to life every spring. So we're thrilled to have you here. So today's presentation is by Teresa Wicks, an avian conservation biologist who works for Portland Audubon. Teresa has a rich and diverse background in bird surveys and monitoring, outreach and education, has a master's in environmental education along with her PhD in environmental sciences. And I think that you'll find that Teresa's background and expertise in this area comes through in this topic. So without further ado, Bird, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take it away.
I'll start by saying hello and welcome to this presentation on eBird and community science. I am giving this presentation from Wadatiga Paiute land out in Eastern Oregon. The Wadatiga Paiute were forcibly removed from their land and sent to a reservation that is a very small fraction of their original homelands, just outside of Burns. And we work with the tribe pretty regularly, doing youth programs and supporting their natural resources program in monitoring and restoration efforts as those opportunities come up and needs, I should say, come up. So as Janelle mentioned, I work for Portland Audubon. I'm their Eastern Oregon Field Coordinator. I've been out here in Harney County since 2018, and in 2019, we started developing some community science projects that use eBird. And so in this presentation, we'll go over some of the basics of eBird, like why use eBird, how eBird can support your personal interests while also supporting science. And then we'll go a little bit specifically into the Project IBIS program and how eBird supports the work we're doing in Harney County. And then the last bit before questions, there will be some time where I'll go over how to use the eBird mobile app and then we'll have time for you to ask questions, set up your own eBird accounts and things like that at the end, toward the end of the presentation. Where is the thing? All right, so I want to start by asking, why do you keep bird lists? And I'll give you 30 seconds to think about that. If you're interested in sharing, you can, or maybe we'll save that for the end. All right, so I should go back. So the why do you keep bird lists part, I think for a lot of people, this answer is really, really variable. I know for me personally, a lot of it has to do with maintaining my own account of the phenology of how, or I should say when birds arrive, how long they're here for, cool bird sightings I've had, interesting behavior things. So my bird lists are usually kept in a notebook and often include sketches and interesting behaviors I've seen and things like that. But a lot of people keep bird lists for other reasons too, including for science. A lot of people keep lists just so they can actually keep, maintain their life list. So how many species they've seen every year, or I don't know, recently I talked to a birder who keeps a list because they had a goal to see 100 species in every county in Oregon in 2021. And so they kept a list so they could make sure that they actually met that goal. All right, so what is eBird? This is a snapshot of what an eBird account looks like. You can see here we've got species observed, complete checklists, and then it'll also tell you how many photos you've posted and things like that. So eBird, first and foremost, is a digital bird or life list. I ran into a birder out here in Harney County a couple of years ago who has been birding since the late 60s or early 70s, and they actually were using eBird to enter checklists that they had been maintaining since the 70s. And so they were transforming their paper list and all of their books into a digital format because it's just so easy to look at those snapshots of where you've birded and how many birds you've seen and things like that. So you can record your bird sightings. eBird is also secondarily a community science project. So eBird in and of itself functions as a community science project where Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology makes the data available to biologists across the world. So if I wanted to start a project looking at savanna sparrows throughout their range, I could actually use eBird sightings to or use the data from other people's eBird sightings to track some savanna sparrow data. And so really realistically, like, it functions very well as this very, very large data set. So anybody that is, even if your goal personally is to maintain a life list, you're always contributing to this really large community science project. It also functions as a database for bird sightings. And so that includes rare bird sightings for people that are twitchers, people that like to follow those rare bird reports. It also functions as a database, as I mentioned before, for your own personal bird sightings. There are ways using eBird now in its most current iteration where you can actually track, what do they call it? Needs list. So you can actually use this really large database to figure out what birds you've seen this year and what birds you actually need to see in order to, I guess, maximize your bird sightings for the year. You can use it to search the hotspots and checklists. So sometimes when I'm traveling, for example, if I was going to go visit my cousin in Fort Collins, Colorado, I would go to eBird, I would use their hotspot search function, and I would start looking at the hotspots and checklists that people had been submitting in that area to figure out places I might want to go birding. And this is actually, I use eBird and its hotspot function probably more often than anything for just making decisions about where I want to bird when I'm traveling and whatnot. So eBird in the last 2 decades went from having very, very few users to just last year, so 2021, for the first time ever, they hit more than 1 million checklists submitted every month for the year. So they've gone over 1 million in certain months and during certain, like the Global Big Day and things like that previously, but last year, every month of the year, there were more than 1 million checklists submitted. So you can see from this chart, this peak here is May, and that's the, what do they call that one? So that's Global Big Day, which is a globe-wide big day kind of challenge. So it's Cornell Lab of Ornithology encouraging people to get out and try to see as many birds as possible over this one weekend in May. And then this other lower spike right here is the October Big Day. So they do something similar in fall, encouraging people to go out during fall migration and do another big day effort, which is just seeing as many birds as you can in a day. So all of those spikes kind of coincide with migration and these weekend-long efforts that eBird hosts in an effort to get as much data as possible collected over those periods of time. So one of the cool things that eBird data is used to do is make these models of bird migration. So I used, oh, this needs to go away, hold on. So this is the Ross's goose. And you can see, so all of these, all of the data that went into making this model comes from eBird sightings. So one of the cool things, Ross's geese, a very large percentage of the population stops in the Harney Basin every spring on their way north to their breeding territory. And so if you look kind of in this little area right here, you'll see one, it's a pretty small but very dark dot show up during migration right there, top of the finger. And that is more than 50% of all of Ross's geese that migrate, that are in North America, stop through, or in the Western Flyway, stop through the Harney Basin on their way north. And that's why that really dark dot shows up. So this is one of those, every birder that comes through here in April and is submitting checklists, that data helps inform this model that was created to track Ross's geese migration. And we can see the same thing here with, this is, I can't make this thing go away. This is Sora sightings throughout the year. So you can actually watch the Sora travel across the wetlands, especially through the Midwest. Again, these are all based on eBird sightings. So we have an idea of what their populations look like. And then all of that information is put into a model at Cornell, and they produce these pretty cool graphics in order to help people better understand bird migration. This one is yellow warblers. They're really, really common out here in the Harney Basin during the breeding season. And it's pretty cool to just watch their numbers, surge across the continent as the breeding season gets closer, and then watch them rescind back as winter approaches. So these are all the really important reasons to participate in eBird outside of that, kind of personal important reason of just being able to keep a list of how many birds you've seen. So because we're talking about community science and we're talking about eBird, I am highlighting Project IBIS. So IBIS, while they do use the Sylvius floodplain, IBIS and Project IBIS actually stands for Inventorying Birds in the Sylvius floodplain. And the goal of this project is to better understand how and when birds are using the habitat, the flood irrigated wet meadows around Burns in Harney County, and to understand how management and changes in water availability and some of the really big infrastructure projects that we've been working on to make irrigation more efficient out here. We're hoping to collect data on all of those. So, the bird use and how all of these projects that we're working on influence bird use in the floodplain. We have 6 ranches that participate in this project, and all of the surveys are done from the road. So nobody has to go onto the private ranch land in order to collect data. It's all done from your car, pulled over on the side of the road, monitoring these fields. We try to get people out every other week from March to the end of August, and then once a month minimum from January to the end of October. We don't collect data in November and December for the most part because we have very few birds out using the floodplain in those months, and the species composition doesn't change a lot from October to January. And so we're not, as far as we can tell, we're not missing species by not monitoring in those 2 months. So from January 2020 to October 2021, we had about 200 hours of data collection, and that's almost evenly split between 2020 and 2021. Birders have identified 124 species from 4 guilds and 1 really large guild labeled other. So it's like raptors and corvids and things like that is in our 5th guild that is not actually a guild, but labeled as another type guild. And more than 109,000 individual detections have been made over those 200 hours of data collection. And that's largely influenced by the snow and Ross's geese that are stopping over here before they head north to their breeding grounds. So last year alone, there were about almost 46,000 individual detections. And of those almost 46,000 detections, approximately 30 to 40,000-ish, were snow and Ross's geese. So the bulk of our individual detections are these really large flocks of birds that come through. The other important thing to note about this is that individual detections doesn't necessarily mean individuals. It's the number of birds that were seen by birders because we don't have a way through this project to understand. So like one birder might see 40,000 birds, and the next day another birder might report 20,000 birds. We don't really have a way of knowing if those are the same birds or not. So it doesn't necessarily mean individual birds. It just means that these are the number of birds that have been counted by people, which is a little bit tricky maybe. All right, so I do want to take a minute to go over setting up an account. So if you already have a Cornell Lab account, then it's actually one account will log you into almost all of their community science projects that Cornell sponsors. So Nest Watch and not the Great Backyard Bird Count, because that one you actually have to pay to participate in, but like the Global Big Day and things like that, all of those accounts are under one sign-in. So when you create your account, this is what it will look like on the website. I am going to admit now that I am a birder who mostly still keeps my notes on paper. I just had somebody today ask me if I was a 75-year-old because I tend to keep my lists on paper and then transfer them to eBird on my computer, which is the old school way of doing this. So when you get into your account, this is like the home screen you'll see. So it'll have your stats. You can actually look at a map of all the places that you've been, and it changes the color of the regions you've been in based on how many checklists you've submitted from that area. Cursor. All right, so eBird Mobile is what most people want to be using. Actually, I think, so So in eBird Mobile, this is what the app looks like when you open it on your phone. And we're going to go over some instructions on entering data, just so you can see what that looks like, because it's, I think, an area of using eBird that is sometimes harder for people. And so I'll ask you to log in. When you log in, it'll automatically take you, or no, when you first log in, it does this. It's like eBird is trying to make sure it has the most current list of birds for your area that you're in. So it's validating all of the information about how you want the species to be displayed. And well, then ask a bunch of other questions like, do you want your distance associated with your checklist and metric or not? And then you start to tell it where you are. And so basically a bird pack in eBird is the, it is like all of the birds that eBird expects you to have see. And you can also tell it to show all of the rarities. And so it's like taking the database that is eBird's brain and putting it into your mobile app so that it can help you figure out what birds you want to enter. And so then when you pick your location, it will automatically, the funny thing about eBird is if you say, I am in the Harney Basin, but I'm at Pea Ranch, and you see snow geese, and snow geese aren't seen there very often, they'll be described as being rare, even though in the Harney Basin, they're actually not rare because they just aren't reported down there very often. So it's literally taking a very, very specific point, your GPS point, and geolocating the list it's generating for you based on the exact point that you are at. So when you're entering species on the computer, you can tell eBird things like, was it an adult? You can also tell it things like what sex the bird you found is. On the mobile app, you can't do that. You can only tell it the breeding code, which is, is it showing obvious signs that it's trying to court a mate, or is it on a nest or feeding young? And then you can leave notes. So it's kind of a downside to the mobile app, in my opinion, is that you can't enter more specifics about the individuals you're seeing. And so when you're entering in the mobile app, when you click on the species you want to add, you add the number. When you want to add more, it won't actually make you go to the whole box. It will allow you through these plus signs. My cursor being weird. These plus signs here, it'll actually allow you to just start adding numbers from there once you have entered a species. So if you've never entered a trumpeter swan in your list, it's going to make you go through this page that's displayed right now. And if you have already seen a trumpeter swan and you want to add another one, then it allows you to just add 1 or 10 or whatever at a time from there.
Did you mute it?
Bird, I have a question.
Yes.
So you said that when you enter a bird in the app, you can add information about its breeding behavior.
Yes.
And so if you do that, so say you saw a trumpeter swan and it's sitting on a nest, And so you put that information in there because that was the first trumpeter swan that you saw that day. If you see 4 more trumpeter swans in Benson Pond, and you do a plus sign on the trumpeter swan, wouldn't it apply that breeding information to those other individuals?
It's a really good question. It's the one thing about entering lists into eBird that I think is a little bit clunky and weird. So eBird as a database is not actually interested in the specifics of every individual that you see or that you saw on your trip. They're interested in what stage, or they describe it as being like the highest stage of breeding behavior that you saw. So for example, it's really common out here doing Project IBIS surveys to see like 50 red-winged blackbirds in a field. And starting in about May, you end up with a pretty wide range of behaviors. So you'll see some of them who are just males defending territory. You'll see some of them where the males are actively interacting with females. So that would be a pair, which is higher than a singing male. And then the closer you get to the end of May, the more likely you are to see females carrying nest material, and you'll still see males singing. And so what they want to know is what is the most progressed breeding behavior that you saw, in part because that's giving them an idea of what is happening. They're not interested in knowing if it was 15 pairs or 1 pair and 15 individuals. Sometimes that starts to get, like, if you say, oh, I saw 8 males and 8 females, and the highest stage of breeding I saw was pairs, they're gonna assume that all of those were in pairs. But yeah, once you get into that part of the year where all the pairs are kind of doing different things, the eBird or Cornell's interest is not in how many of those individuals are doing that one behavior. It's just what is the most advanced behavior being displayed, because that gives them a better idea of what part of their phenology the birds are kind of entering into. And I think it's tricky. Like, from a data perspective, if I want to know how many of these red-winged blackbirds that I saw as pairs in May have young in July, it's a much harder thing to answer actually using eBird. Then you have to come up with better ways for recording data, I guess. But yeah, it is weird and it does seem confusing, but overall, I think that's filling the purpose that Cornell wants that breeding category to fill.
Great, thank you. While we're taking this small question break because of my question, Amy has a question as well. She would like to know if there are pictures of the birds in the eBird app to help with identification, or do you suggest a different app for that purpose?
It's a really good question. So the eBird mobile app itself does not have pictures in it. Cornell Lab of Ornithology makes an app called Merlin Bird ID that is linked to eBird. So especially for beginning birders, the Merlin Bird ID app is a really great app because it walks you through, I have this print brochure thing that I made for Merlin, and I wish I had it with me. So Merlin will basically ask you questions like, where are you birding? What is the habitat like? What color was the birds that you saw? What size was the bird that you saw? What were some of its behaviors that you saw? And then it will, using the information you put in there, give you a list with photos of the birds that you likely saw. And then you can pick the bird or birds that you saw from that list. And then my understanding is that because it's linked to eBird, if you were out, say, birding in the Harney Basin, it would actually take all of the sightings on that one trip you were on, put them all into your eBird list, and then basically upload those to eBird for you as a checklist. And so I think the Merlin app, that would actually be a really good workshop to do probably in the future, now that I think about it. The Merlin app actually, for beginning birders especially, might be an even better place to start, because of the fact that it can help with visual. And now they're actually also doing some audio ID. When they first started, you could click on the, if I remember correctly, you could click on the record, like the vocalizations for the species you thought it was, but now you can use the Merlin ID app when there are birds singing by, there's a feature in the app that basically turns on your microphone, and it can identify the birds that are singing around you, based on some algorithm in the app, I guess. And so you can actually use the Merlin ID app to help you create a list of birds you see and or hear. It's a pretty cool app, actually.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah. I wish that I had videos of that. Oh wait, what have I done? Okay, so at the end, I'm gonna go ahead and walk you through. So when you're done with your list in mobile, eBird mobile, it will it'll basically ask you to confirm, like to review your list. If you see a rare bird, when you go to submit your list, that's when the app will tell you that you need to add more information. So sometimes, not what I wanted. Okay, so sometimes it'll, like, if northern shovelers were a rare bird at some time of year, which they're not really out here, but if they were, at this point, the app would say, oh, that's a rare bird, you need to add more information about it. And that's where you would write the description of the bird that you saw, so that the reviewers for eBird know that you saw what you think you saw. So these categories of observations or observation types are mostly here so that scientists that are using this data have a better understanding of the effort that was put into making this checklist. So for example, if I was to hike 5 miles and do that in a very short period of time for a birding, for a birding walk, because when you're birding, you can take up to, a mile can take up to 30 minutes, depending on how slow you're walking. But if I was out for a run and I was birding while I was running, and I did that 5 miles in 45 minutes, a scientist looking at this, like if my list seems like I might be missing species they would normally expect to see, they can go and look and say, oh, this person was traveling, or this was an incidental bird list, which is like out when I'm out for a run, I'm not actually focusing on birds. And then they use that information to tell them, like, that checklist may not be as helpful for them if what they want is to know that somebody spent like time sitting and very intentionally looking at birds. So these observation types are really, really helpful for parsing through data when biologists are looking for, I guess, quality of data, and then the amount of effort spent per acre, for example, or per mile. So the other thing, though, when we're doing Project IBIS, we're actually using an observation type that isn't in the app. So like when I ask people to participate in our project, we ask them to use the area count method, which for some reason comes up on the website, but not on the app. And so that just means I'm counting every bird that is in this area I'm looking at. And because it's such a large area, yes, you're traveling, but you're also stationary. So it's like kind of a weird mix of the two. And so that's why they have this special methodology. And so that's this other is where most of those alternative observation protocols go, except for the area one, which doesn't for some reason come up on the app. Anyway, so the other thing it will ask you is to make sure that this information about your traveling. So if you're traveling, how many people were with you? How long did you bird for? And then how far did you go? And that's that metric I just mentioned about effort. So if it took you 30 minutes to do a mile or 5 minutes to do a mile, that changes the effort per mile that you're putting into it. And again, is really, really helpful for scientists trying to use that data later. It'll also ask you if it's a complete checklist of the birds that you identified. If you check no, your list does not get included with in like data sets that birders tend to download, or that scientists download and use for so it's a complicated thing. So if you were able to identify 20 species and there were 2 species you couldn't identify, and so you say you check the no, it's not a complete list, then those 20 species you did identify also get hidden from scientists trying to use the data from that area, because the checklist is considered incomplete. And so it's a really important thing to note, because I think a lot of people don't understand that that's what that, like that saying no basically moves your checklist to kind of a different category in terms of the database that eBird is. And when you say yes, then that goes into the data sets that they can download. And there are lots and lots of ways to account for birds that you saw but maybe couldn't identify. They have several categories that say things like passerine species, which just means it was a songbird that I couldn't identify. And that data is actually also helpful for scientists. And again, if you say, I saw 3 songbirds I couldn't identify, and you check yes for your checklist, then that all the other data from the species you were able to identify becomes usable by scientists. So sometimes it feels counterintuitive to say, well, I saw a bird I couldn't identify, and then also, yes, I identified all the species, but important part of that, submitting your lists. Anyway, so when you have submitted checklists, it goes into your checklist category. Here are some other options for community science. So not just Project IBIS, Great Backyard Bird Count happens in February. And so through the eBird website, you can actually click on like there's a community science link, and you can actually go in and find information about all of these community science projects that you can participate in. So the Great Backyard Bird Count is a really great example, because it is an eBird based community science project. So one thing to note is that they do, because of who they partner with, so because they partner with Audubon, I think, they charge a fee for participating in the Great Backyard. No, wait, Feeder Watch. I'm sorry, it's Project Feeder Watch that has a fee attached to it, not the Great Backyard Bird Count. Okay. Cursor disappeared again, sorry. So it was a really quick tour through eBird and why eBird is helpful and ways that you can find it helpful for you. We'll take questions in a second. I think I do want to show the, I'm going to exit out of the sharing, hold on, and go to eBird. Stop sharing because I actually did that first. And we'll go eBird. Okay. So this is what eBird looks like. This is my my account, I have my account set to private. It tells you that right there. It mostly just means that nobody can read my information or profile. So eBird in 2018 or 2019 maybe allowed people to start setting up their own profiles and then sharing their profiles with other people. I'm not super interested in connecting to people that way personally, so I have mine set to private, which just, like I said, it means that people can't read my profile or try to connect to me through eBird. So this is what I was talking about with where it'll show you where you've birded. As you can see, I have only submitted checklists from the United States. It has the number of species that I've actually entered in, checklists, and photos. My favorite thing about eBird is the species maps and exploring hotspots. So actually, so if we wanted to go to Malheur and see what has been reported, so as you can see from here, there are lots of checklists in this region of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge that I typed in. And you can actually see, so if you hover over the checklist, it'll tell you where that is. Benson Pond is where I'm interested in seeing. So there have been 245 species and 1,257 checklists in Benson Pond. If you click View Details, it'll take you into the way that the checklists work is a little bit funny. So Canada goose, for example, was one of the last species reported from there today, actually. And so even if there is a species that is really common at Benson Pond, but it hasn't been reported on a checklist for a year, for example, then you would actually find that species all the way down toward the end of toward the beginning of the list. So the way that it's organized is most recent species sightings first, and then like the species at the end, or the species that have been seen like the longest amount of time in between now and the last time they were viewed. You can also look at people's lists by recent visits. So if I really wanted to look at this list submitted by Pamela, I would click on the date, and then it shows me that there were 17 species and 87 individuals that she saw this morning. Well, yeah, this morning at about 11:48 on her trip at Benson Pond. So when I'm interested in going somewhere and looking at all the hotspots in that area, I might type in a whole area like Harney County. And when I zoom in, it'll show me where all the hotspots are. You can see from this is basically all Malheur. All of these checklists are Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. These are all up in the Sylvies floodplain where our Project Ibis points are. And so this is one way to say, like, this really, really red dot is headquarters at Malheur. You can see from here, that means 400 to 500 species have been reported here. So I might be like, if I had never been to Malheur, that would be a point that I would click on and say, oh man, 319 species. Oh, I really want to go there because that's a lot of species that have been seen. Also a way to use eBird to look specifically for a species you might want to see. So this year, I would really like to see black swift. So you type in the species, and I would like to see it near Bend. And this is all of the places that black swifts have been reported year-round from all years. So since people started birding in the Bend area, basically, these are all the black swifts that have been seen there. These big dots are hotspots. That usually means lots and lots of birds are seen there. The little dots are more personal. So it might be like somebody's backyard. And then the blue means that they have not been reported this year or recently. you can use this to refine it. So I might be going to Bend in June or July. And then you click that date range and it will say, oh, this is the only area in June and July they've been reported. So it's a really, really quick skim through how to use the explore function, but I think it's one of the, like for me personally, it's one of my favorite things about eBird. So I wanted to make sure to show that that's one of the cool things about it. I've also used it, out here at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, we get a lot of rare birds. And I've used the explore feature on eBird before when I've seen a rare bird that I'm like, oh, it really looks like that bird, but I'm not 100% certain that was it. I've used this feature to see if other people have ever seen that bird, ever reported it or reported it recently at the refuge. And then I can kind of use that to help confirm whether or not I think that that rare bird is actually what I saw. So that is all that I have for you. Are there any more questions about eBird or birding in the Harney Basin in general, or any of those things?
Well, that was wonderful. And there's nothing in the chat box at the moment, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and just unmute yourself. We have a small group here and we can just share our questions.
Let's see. Okay, let's see. Hi.
Hi, Amy.
I just want, can you, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks. And I was able to download the Merlin site and the eBird, and I looked out my back window and I saw a crow. So I entered it into Merlin, and it did transfer over to eBird. It said that I saw, it didn't say specifically what bird it was, but it said that I saw one bird in April so far.
Well, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
The Merlin app. So Merlin came out. Merlin started as a website that people could use, and came out as an app like a long time before I ever got a smartphone. And so I haven't used it a lot because at that point I didn't really need the assistance, but I know a lot of beginning birders who really, really like Merlin. And it's something that we like for teachers who have like iPads and mobile devices they can use with their students. It's an app we recommend a lot for using, for helping to train people, like all of the important things to look for in a bird. So I'm glad that it seems to be working.
Yeah, and it actually was very user friendly. It like asked me what sizes the bird, and then it only asked me like 3 questions, and then there's like a button right there that I clicked on that made the sound of the bird. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah. It's a pretty good app, and I love the scale they use. Cornell many years ago now created like a graphic of the scale that they use for Merlin. That's like, a robin or a crow or a goose or whatever the scale is. And I love it as a visual, that helping people think about how big those birds are.
Yeah. Now, do you recommend when people go to the Migratory Bird Festival that they enter their sightings in eBird, or do you think it just is going to totally, skew the results because people are going to be reporting the same bird?
So I do recommend that people enter their birds when they're out here at the bird festival. And there are ways through the date, so for me, because I use eBird data, when I'm downloading the eBird data from our Project IBIS points, if there is, especially when there are ways for me to look at the date. So if 20 people reported a marbled godwit, for example, which is a type of shorebird, at a point the same day, and they'd all reported one, it'll show up as 20 observations, but I can go in and see that that was 20 different people on the same day around the same time. And so it was just one bird. It's like I can go in and start modifying or using all that information to help modify the data when I go in to analyze it, so that I'm not making it look like we have these like really, really wild numbers of godwits, for example, out here. So there are ways to take into account that skewing of data that starts to happen. It is, there was a project, a community science project that wrapped up just a couple of years ago in Oregon called Oregon 2020. That what the goal of Oregon 2020 was to encourage more people to bird in places that are not birded very often. Because one of the things we know is that really popular places like Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, we have a lot of bird data from Malheur National Wildlife Refuge because so many people go there. We have very little data from some of the areas just outside of Malheur because so few people go there. And so there are more people making these efforts to encourage people to bird like at different times of year or in different places that where people may not normally go, in order to kind of help, I guess, smooth out that skewing that happens. But yes, always, I would be a bad scientist maybe if I didn't encourage people to enter their data into eBird.
Is there a way to find out, like, I mean, I'm all for doing that, but I think that I would rather do it. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is there a way to find out where the most useful data collection areas are, so that if I only have like 1 or 2 days, I can go to those areas at that time?
Yeah, I mean, so I know that our Project IBIS sites are all hotspots in eBird that are labeled Project IBIS. They're all up near town. So I always encourage people, if you only have a few days and you really want your data to be helpful for projects like community science projects that are out here, Project IBIS is one that it takes maybe 3 hours to drive the loop, and because each site takes approximately 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how many birds are there to survey. When in a really wet year, it takes longer because there are just so many birds, but like this year, there's not a lot of water. So the surveying goes a little bit quicker. But, you know, I try to encourage people to do things like if you have 3 hours and you're willing to give that to Project IBIS, we really love the data. But eBird, so the one downside to eBird's community science page is that you have to be registered through them. So you can look for other community science projects out here through eBird's community science page, but only people that have been able to register with them show up on that page. So if there was somebody doing, like Oregon 2020 was on eBird's community science page because they had partnered with eBird that way. But it, you know, for some of the smaller scale projects that people work on, that stuff, those points don't always make it to the community science page. And then I think you have to just know people that know the projects happening in that area. But
So
Can I
like,
add,
for example, oh, sorry, go ahead, Janelle.
I just want to add, Amy, so that you know that the protocol for Project IBIS, I'm not sure, maybe I missed you mentioning this earlier, Bird, but the protocol for that survey is on Portland Audubon's website.
Okay, so if I did want to participate in that Project IBIS, then I would go to the Portland Audubon Society website and look it up on that first.
Or you could contact Bird directly and get signed up. Are you doing any trainings for that this year, Bird?
Probably not. We typically do them in February, and this year February got away from us. But people who want to, I have had a few people reach out to me that are not necessarily comfortable doing the surveys on their own, and had them ask if we might be like, if they might be able to come along like caravan style on a survey with me. We do have a seasonal out here who potentially could do a survey with you, like if you want that kind of support. But we tried to record last year's training and then my computer stopped allowing the PowerPoint to work. And so it never worked as a training to upload to the website. But I did put the website for Project IBIS in the chat if you're interested. That way you don't have to go looking for it. Yeah, our next training probably won't be until till this winter.
Okay.
Great. Well, with that,
Alright,
it's
so-
running up against 3 o'clock. Amy, do you have any other questions we can answer for you before we go?
I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for being here.
Okay, take care, guys.
Thanks, you as well.
Okay.